display. We do this all the time with violence in the use of artificial brochures and know what this form of subjective violence, you only have access again to the virtual world of violence, and this virtual world of violence sustains the real world of violence. This is a critical point for him. He's basically saying that psychologically, okay, on several levels, starting psychologically, we need to have problems in the world to talk about because it makes us feel better. We do not actually want to solve those problems. We want to make it look like we're doing something, but also he goes deeper to say is that this lifestyle that we're creating, both psychologically, but it also has material aspects of it, is actually creating that subjective violence in other parts, anywhere, even around us. So it actually is sustained by our illusions of not being victims. Okay? So he claims that we, and this is a quote from him, we need to perceive the contours of the background which generates such real outbursts. So when you hear something in the news and we all have access to a terrorist attack or to a famine or to a war or something like that, this is the virtual representation that we have, and it's objective for us because we all see the same commercials or pick up the same brochures. Real violence. Now, to take a step back, according to Zizek, continuing with the quote, step back enables us to identify a violence that sustains our very efforts to fight violence and to promote tolerance. Okay, so he's trying to identify, or he's about to identify, a violence that sustains all the violence that we hear about, but that we are unaware of. Okay? Step back. Subjective violence is just the most visible portion of a triumvirate that also includes two kinds of objective violence. The first objective violence is symbolic violence, which is embodied in our language and its forms, and to its imposition of a certain universe of meaning. Whoops, you've disappeared again. Are you all right? Okay, should I just continue or? Okay, so subjective violence again is the most visible of the triumvirate. It's what we see out there, but it masks or it's sustained. It's created in a sense from two kinds. The first is the symbolic violence, which comes from our language, and we'll get into that shortly. But the second one is systemic violence, which is where he spends most of his time. Systemic violence, or the often catastrophic consequences of the smooth functioning of our economic and political system. An example of this is when you buy a banana. The amount of violence that was imposed upon whole groups of people and the earth to get that banana to your home and so that you can eat it is huge. And it is exponentially larger in our world today than it has ever been in the history of the world due to the industrialization and mass production of consumer wants. If in the past you had a banana and you picked it yourself off a tree, you're doing very little bit of violence. If we in the Western world have huge plantations in Central America and we're hiring the locals and pretty much forcing them to work on these plantations because we deprive them of all other forms of nourishment, of sustenance, we're creating a huge amount of violence there. Plus, it's seemingly unnatural to have a purely banana plantation that goes against sort of the ecological system of the area. So all of this added together, plus the oil and the costs of getting the bananas from Central America into Canada add more to that, plus the plastic and the boxes and the storage and all the stuff that is needed to get them to you has varying degrees of what he calls systemic violence. And he points out, we are the worst in history. Our class, that is the middle and upper class of the Western post-industrial world, are the worst offenders in history. We are worse, yes, that's you and I, and pretty much everybody we know, are worse than slave owners in the antebellum South or in the previous Roman Empire. We hurt more people more deeply than any of these people ever did. That's his claim. Sorry, with what? I'm, yes, yes. Well, capitalism for him, yes and no. So it's more with industrialization than with directly capitalism. Capitalism happens to be industrialized today. It wasn't always the case, but yes, it's that limitless growth we're at in late style capitalism. So the more important part for him, I believe, is the industrialization. Okay, so whenever our political and economic systems are running smoothly, we don't see any violence, but it's there. It's there in the background, and we are blind to it. So, pardon? I'm sorry, you're breaking way up, but we can continue. Am I sounding clear here? Or because if I'm talking like I'm hearing you, nobody would be hearing me. Every second syllable is blocked out. Okay. All right. So, okay. So there is a complication. So while it's true that anyone can see and experience objective violence, it is for most people invisible and not seen or comprehended. So the catch is that, and this is his quote, the catch is that subjective and objective violence cannot be perceived from the same standpoint. Subjective violence is experienced as such against the background of a non-violent zero level. It is seen as a perturbation of the normal peaceful state of things. We're talking about subjective violence. This is what we would see in the news. It's looked at as say, why is this happening? Like everything's going so well. Why are they rebelling? Kind of stuff, right? And when it's compared to that zero level, it's an indication of the blindness of the people who sustain the existing level of violence and only see it from a level of zero and above. So starting with the first sideways glance, he calls this SOS violence. Zizek begins by describing the all too common bewilderment of the well-to-do when they discover a potential or actual catastrophe to their way of life. He quoted an example of Russians during the Russian Revolution, noble Russians, who were gentle souls. They cared about and they were really bewildered as to why anybody would want to take their lifestyle away from them. He points out that another example is after the attacks on 9/11, people might have asked, why do they hate us so much? That is willful blindness. When somebody says that we didn't deserve this, it was they're totally evil and all that stuff. No, he is saying people don't smash their planes into buildings without having a good reason. And the idea that they just hate our freedoms is nonsense. It's because of what we have done to them. They see it, we don't. And it should have been a wake-up call, but still, even today, people say these kind of things and wonder why they hate us so much, why they hate our freedoms or that kind of stuff. That's all nonsense. It's all, it just shows an incredible naivety about how the world actually works and how much damage we, as in our class, our society, is doing to them. So people might have said after 9/11, don't we help them so much with aid, with trade? The United States is the global policeman. We're protecting them, right? So these people are asking these questions are revealing their complete blindness to objective violence. And again, the objective violence were symbolic and systemic. both of which are viewed as non-existent for most people in our world. So these poor blind devils in the world are labeled by Zizek as liberal communists. And like most nice, upstanding people in the developed world, they are to some degree, they are to a great degree, the problem. Okay. So however, the exemplary figures of evil, I think I lost you. Really saying we're the problem today. Those of us who are, middle class and above in the developed world. So, so the exemplary figures of evil today are not ordinary consumers who pollute the environment and live in a violent world of disintegrating social links, but those who are fully engaged in creating conditions for such universal devastation and pollution, who buy their way out of their own activity, living in gated communities, eating organic foods, taking holidays in wildlife preserves, and so on. So although we are part of the problem, unless you own the means of production in a sense, because Zizek is quite the communist, you're only a foot soldier with the group that is destroying the earth and creating all the violence. So although we are the problem, we are not the biggest source of the problem, which he would point out are people like Bill Gates and George Soros. And he mentions these two as quintessential examples of men who used their hurtful tools, used every hurtful tool possible to amass great wealth and then became philanthropists. And then here's a quote from him. The dedicated liberal communist, frightened, caring, fighting violence, and the blind fundamentalist exploding in rages are two sides of the same coin. While they fight subjective violence, liberal communists are the very agents of the structural violence which creates the conditions for the explosion of subjective violence. We are creating all of our subjective violence. Everything that we see in the news, it's essentially our fault. It's the same philanthropists who gave millions for AIDS, education for tolerance, have ruined the lives of thousands through financial speculation and thus created the conditions for the rise of the very intolerance that is being fought. That's his claim.
So can you hear me now?
In this sense, subjective violence is.
Can't hear me now.
Sort of, yes.
You can.
I can hear you, but it's hard to understand.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
All right. Hold on. Chat, can you hear me now? I'm gonna ask. I tried adding an audio input. See if that makes a difference. No one's saying anything, so just continue.
Okay, just continuing. So, in this sense, subjective violence is the seen side of the unseen other side of the coin of objective violence. The symbolic and systemic violence that keeps subjective violence in check oftentimes fails. And this is when we hear about it. Whenever the violence that we keep people in line, that we use to keep people in line, when it fails, we hear about it. When it doesn't fail, we think everything's fine. That's the smooth working of our political and economic systems. So it is during these failures that we witness the violence on the news or in our lives and wonder, how is all of this possible? The violence in our lives has moved above the zero level. That's how we notice it. The news kindly gives us the perpetrator of subjective violence, and it makes us feel better that we know we are not like those perpetrators. Again, there's a psychological benefit for bad news. Like every time we hear of a disaster, like a mass shooting, we think, hey, that's not us. Thank God we wouldn't be there. It has a psychologically pleasing aspect to it, in spite of the fact that we all say, oh, God, that's horrible. Thank God it wasn't me, is what we're thinking in the background.
Right, and it's a way to kind of point to who the bad guys are.
Yes, and it's not us ever. And because it's not us, we don't have to do anything about it. We can give a little bit of money to some charity that's going to try and do something about it and make our conscience feels better about it. So then most people stop thinking, terrible, I wish somebody would do something, and then we stop thinking about it. We don't look any further to the instigator of the perpetrator. Most people do not want to look because it's uncomfortable and gets closer to home. Most people sense that we and our way of life are the instigators of subjective violence with the objective violence that we do, but we do not wish to see it. He believes that we are akin to German citizens during World War II who probably knew but didn't want to admit that they knew what was going on with the Jews.
Right.
We are just like them, according to Zizek. So if we don't have any sympathy for them, we're being hypocrites. We should know. We have every tool at our disposal to know what we are doing, and most of us don't want to care beyond giving a charitable thing that allows us to say how much better we are. So we should have no illusions. Liberal communists are the enemy of all other enemies. Religious fundamentalists and terrorists, corrupted and inefficient state bureaucracies are particular figures whose rise and fall depends on contingent local circumstances. Precisely because they want to resolve all the secondary malfunctions of the global system, liberal communists are the direct embodiment of what is wrong with the system as such. So this is where all of these massive amounts of charity and aid go to places that are in so-called need. They make us feel better. And we are fighting the symptom as opposed to the cause. So if there is a famine somewhere, we give them food. We're treating the symptom. There's a famine. But what he's saying is that we caused that famine, and we're not looking at how we caused that famine. There's going to be another one. That's right. The anti-intellectual about it. Oh, we got to do something right now. Donate $5, $10, or whatever you can to fight whatever it is. And right. That's it. Let's not look at ourselves and what we're doing to cause this. Yeah, for disaster relief. And then we can sleep with a clear conscience. So visible violence or subjective violence is not the problem. It is, again, the symptom. Fighting the symptom does not alleviate the problem. The problem is objective violence, the violence that keeps the zero level of subjective violence as the ideal norm or the visible norm. However, the problem, of course, is invisible, and this needs to be borne in mind in the midst of the various tactical alliances and compromises, sexism, religious obscurantism, and such like that. He ends that first chapter with a really cool poem. He doesn't specifically say this, but he hints at it because the poem is what he says we need to do. And it goes something like this, if I can find it here. This is part of his solution, okay? Step forward. We hear that you are a good man. He's talking about us, those of us who feel that we're good people, upstanding people, caring about the earth, the environment, the racism, and all that kind of stuff. Yes. We hear that you are a good man. You cannot be bought, but the lightning which strikes the house also cannot be bought. So we may take pride in our independence and in our ability to hold our own position. You hold what you said, but what did you say? You are honest, you say, your opinion. Which opinion? You are brave. Against whom? You are wise. For whom? You do not consider your personal advantages. Those advantages, you do not consider them. Or whose advantages do you not consider them? You are a good friend. Are you also a good friend of the good people? Hear us then. We know you are our enemy. This is why we shall now put you in front of a wall, but in consideration of your merits and good qualities, we shall put you in front of a good wall and shoot you with good bullets from a good gun and bury you with a good shovel in the good earth. What he's hinting at is that the solution to this problem is we should all be taken out and shot.
Oh dear.
And that essentially is the end of the first half of this book.
Okay.
We are the problem, and the world would be better off if we were taken out and shocked. Now,
well,
when I taught this with others, the question is going to be flummoxed to say when he hears that yes, he is in fact advocating violence, and he wants he has a nuanced view of this. Part of the reason that all movements to make the world a better place have failed is because they are not violent enough. There is a huge amount of violence that is being directed currently towards destroying the world and making people's lives miserable for the sake of a very small select group of people. If we redirect that violence, not at the victims of it today, but at the perpetrators of it, is there a certain justice in that? He believes there is. And that is the problem with saying, that's the problem with being shocked to say that violence is not the solution. Violence is, but more importantly, it's a redirection of the violence that's already there, away from where it's being directed, to those who are directing it. In a sense, he doesn't come out and say this exactly, because I think he would probably never get published, but he is hinting at we who create so much violence in the world need to feel and have a taste of our own medicine.
yes.
And if we were to do that, if we were to feel the violence that we inflict on others, we are much more likely to change our ways. But as long as we don't, as long as we say, oh, that looks, those terrorists and those famines are over there, we have to do something about it, and let's give some money, nothing is ever going to change. So for him, I believe he's basically saying that the reason there's been failures of anything in the world is because there's been a lack of violence, or lack of sufficient violence. And if we add the violence directed at the people who are causing it or perpetrating it in the first place, they will change because they are extremely soft and so caring about the world.
So what he's saying then is the revolutions we've had so far, like the bourgeois revolutions, or even the socialist revolutions, weren't violent enough. They didn't go as far as they needed to in order to fully stamp out the violence.
Yes. So I think the Cuban Revolution and the Russian Revolution of 1918, I think, were violent enough, and they did change the world order. They just didn't stay violent enough. Well,
yeah.
In the case of the Soviet one, right?
But Stalinism was socialism in one country. So exactly, they didn't continue that necessary violence onto the rest of the world.
I think that through properly. Yeah, it probably didn't. They didn't go on and direct it back at themselves, and they just replaced the previous oligarchs. So, yeah, probably discount what I just said about that. Maybe they did go far enough, and they didn't keep it in the right direction. So the problem is that there is huge amounts of violence in the world. It just needs to be redirected at those who are causing the violence, because he believes they will change, and that would be us.
That would be us. All right. Yeah. So we need to feel the pain of whatever everyone is feeling, and yeah, I agree. We at least need to understand the violence that we are inflicting, in fact, on the rest of the world. Like the comfort that we experience is built upon the violence on others, and that's what people don't realize.
That's precisely right. Yes. Okay, so I think we can finish the rest of the book next time, or we can do one more chapter if you'd like right now. Your call.
Which we've done 2 chapters.
So we've done the introduction and the first chapter.
And when you're left?
4 more.
4 more. Well, do you think they're about even time wise?
So we've been at this, what, 45 minutes? Okay, let's do one more chapter then. We're usually about an hour, right? Okay, so the second sideways glance, he calls this chapter "Fear Thy Neighbor as Thyself." So Zizek begins by defining our world as biopolitics in a post-political world. Biopolitics in a post-political world. So here's his quote, here's his definition of post-political, which he defines as a politics which claims and instead focuses on expert management and the idea of it's like we're looking for the highest and best use. We're looking for the most effective and efficient use of resources. That is what he calls as post-political. And he adds this to Michel Foucault's notion of biopolitics, which means the regulation of the security and welfare of human lives as biopolitics' primary goal. This means that the world is run by experts. These experts run the world, or this expert-run world is the new zero level of politics. It's analogous to how the notion that no unwanted physical force, now he's doing it in a different context, but it's still there. The zero level of politics is not really a no politics world. It merely appears that way. In the appearance that the zero level of politics is the default politics, and it is what experts, credentialed experts, believe is the best thing. All rational experts run things. The only way to change or adjust the default is to get extremely emotionally riled up. All the evidence, and I can see this even at council, is all the evidence suggests that it is fear that is the most powerful political emotion. There is no end of topics to fear, and Zizek brings up the point that tolerance is a politically correct way of phrasing a fear of harassment. Here's a major point for him, at least in this chapter. If you are tolerant, you're actually expressing a fear of harassment. That's the deeper psychological thing that he accuses all of us of. You want to be tolerated and free of harassment concerning any of your quirks or your eccentricities. And it is this fear of harassment that animates the fear of immigrants, of crime change. And so the apparent political opposites of tolerance and hatred of the other are revealed to be the two sides of the same fear. This is what liberal communists really fear. The imposition of others on their way of life. And that's why they are blissfully blind as to the violence they're causing. So what these two poles share is precisely the underlying refusal of any higher causes. The notion that the ultimate goal of our lives, is life itself. This is why there is no contradiction between the respect for the vulnerable other and the readiness to justify torture. So he wrote this book in 2008. If you may recall, about that time, just before the financial crisis, there were debates as to whether America actually tortures people or if it's just enhanced interrogation. It's actually the same thing. We have to enhance interrogation. It's the same thing, and it's the justification is our free and open society. Zizek then makes light fun of the naively ethical people who cannot imagine how a murderer or other bad person who has done horrible things can possibly live with themselves, let alone be a good, warm, gentle, and kind to some people. Have you ever heard that expression? It's like, I don't know how you can live with yourself doing what you've done, or how they can live with themselves doing what they do.
Yes.
That's just incredibly naive, and he's basically saying these are like the kind of dunces that we are when we can't see objective violence below the zero level. Okay. Uh, Anybody can be kind to anybody. Anybody can be gentle and warm to anybody they want to be. It doesn't mean that they have to be to everybody. It's just not the way we are.
Right.
So here's a quote. We're dealing here with a tragically misplaced ethical conviction, with a blind trust that are void of its ethical point of reference. Such a blindness, such a violent exclusionary gesture of refusing to see is the innermost constituent of every ethical stance. If you hold an ethical stance, you are blind to something. He calls this fetishistic disavowal, and it is necessary in order to have an ethical system. So to distinguish between the ethical and non-ethical creates an other. So if I decide murder is wrong, I'm going to put murderers on the other side of this ethical line, and they're just plain evil. They can't possibly be good. Well, that's wrong. You can have a nice murderer. And it can be nice to some people. It can be warm and all that kind of stuff.
Right,
but
yeah.
we don't like to think about that, right? So this other, who we put on the other side of the ethical line, is the repository of degrees we do not even want to imagine. And we don't want to imagine because if we did regularly imagine, or worse yet, see in reality, we would not be unaffected. So after describing some brutal acts of torture, Zizek asks, would the watcher be able to continue on as usual? If you watched real torture videos, like say out of a war zone or something like that, would you not be touched by them? Would they not affect you? Would you not be haunted by them? That's part of the reason we do not even want to imagine, let alone think, in many cases, let alone see. So we would not be able to continue on as usual unless we were able to forget. And that's one of the things that we're very good at. It's an act in which we suspend the symbolic efficiency. It's similar to suspending our disbelief when we watch a movie or read a book that has an atrocity in it. So if you've ever watched Schindler's List, there's a lot of atrocities that go on there, but we can, it's just a movie, right? We are suspending our disbelief. Or we can see any evil person the villain in any movie do something horrible. We can say, we're suspending our disbelief. This is just drama. Right? So this is, we essentially forget the term for it, which is what we do on the ethical level when we're watching, that we do at a dramatic level when we're watching art. So we're forgetting what has been witnessed. This forgetting entails a gesture of what is called fetishistic disavowal. I know, and this is his quote, I know, but I don't want to know that I know, so I don't know. I know it, but I refuse to fully assume the consequences of this knowledge so that I can continue acting as if I didn't know it. This is what is going on in our minds expressed in language. But if we even think of it like this, it's hard for us because we don't want to know it.
No. But
he's forcing it to us by saying that. Say again?
No, I'm just agreeing. Yeah.
Okay. So in this way, we can continue to think of ourselves as ethical people without having to think of all the evil we think we have excluded from our lives. We often react quite viscerally when the evil we don't know we know impinges on the frontiers of our consciousness. And here's a quote. An exclusion of some form of otherness from the scope of our ethical concerns is consubstantial with the very founding gesture of ethical universality. So that the more universal our explicit ethics is, the more brutal the underlying exclusion is. Universality, any claims to universality, always excludes somebody. And when they exclude somebody, it excludes them even more so. I think here he may have learned something from Judith Butler. So if when we did Judith Butler a long time ago, she talked about how she's against gay marriage or marriage of any kind being supported by the state. Because anytime you expand the boundaries of what counts as marriage, within the domain of the state, granting privileges that way, you exclude people on the fringes of it. But the greater it becomes, the more those people on the fringes are punished for it. So she saw gay marriage as an attempt to exclude more people by allowing the loudest majority of people, or the loudest minority of people, to be entered into this the system of law. What she would say is, we shouldn't have those privileges in the first place. If you want to be married, you should be married. That's fine, but there's nothing extra that should come with it that excludes others. He's basically saying the same thing. Anytime we create something that's universal, hey, anybody can get married. Why don't you want to get married? Well, because you actually say that it has to be a man and a woman, for example, or a man and a man, or a woman and a woman. It doesn't allow for other things. And the more that you include something in the universality, the more the excluded groups are hurt. So we do not actually want universality, is what he's saying.
Well,
so the excluded other is always a neighbor.
Yeah, so I push back on Judith Butler there. So I put back on Judith Butler there. Once you get gay marriage, I mean, what possible human marriages are counted out? Oh, never mind. I guess there are polygamy, group marriages would count, and I guess bestiality, I suppose, would also not count. All right, I just answered some question.
Okay, so the excluded other is always a neighbor, either next door or on the other side of the world, and language is the excluding medium. Zizek agrees with Jacques Lacan that language isolates us because although it is meant to bring us together, the lived experience that individuals attribute to the symbols of language, such as words, idioms, and expressions, are never the same. Communication is always imperfect. Therefore, the best that we can do when communicating is to have a successful miscommunication. And again, the reason is because my life experience with a particular word is different from yours. So although we may recognize the word, what you understand by it and what I understand by it are sometimes a little different, sometimes hugely different. And insofar as they're different, we are not communicating. But for the purposes of, say, meeting up to 9 o'clock to do this kind of a chat, it's sufficient. Okay, so if this is the best that we can do, there is an increasing fear of the other, the more different they appear. This symbolic violence of necessarily using our private lived experience to be and unavoidably violent. So I remember I said at the beginning we're going to talk about symbolic violence later.
Yeah.
That's where the violence comes in. You and I, coming from the same basic society, share more language than somebody who has not had English as their native language. And even more so with them than somebody who doesn't speak English. So the amount of miscommunication just it continues to increase the further away you get from somebody who's had the same lived experiences. And even that, we can never have had the same lived experience. Even if we were born twins, they would still be different because we've been to different places at different times. This is symbolic. This is the genesis or the start of the symbolic violence, and the exclusion of the other is the political aspect of that. Therefore, any encounter with an other is imbued with the potential violent use of language directed at ourselves. Language also creates space to be free of harassment because of its isolating and distancing in the safety it creates and the possibility of violence that language creates. The more different somebody else is, the greater our fear, because we use the violence of language all the time too. For example, when we speak well of another, we are simultaneously giving a subtle warning. If I said to you, hey, you see the new neighbors, they're from, Africa, but they're good. They're okay, don't worry. You see what's being transmitted there?
Yeah.
As an example of that is, Don't worry about these ones. You just got to worry about other people like them who I haven't met yet.
These are the good ones.
And pardon?
These are the good ones.
That's essentially what we're saying, and we do this all the time, even among ourselves. Dissing people or jockeying for a position, creating in a pecking order, all that kind of stuff is happening. And when we do it with ourselves, we meet somebody else who's other or even more different, we tend to be united against them because they are, from a language perspective, more different. And this is a constant, never-ending human tendency in all languages, and as far as he can see, and I suspect based on the theory, in all with it better. There, and we'll do 1 hour next time with what's left, I hope.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Jeff. That's good. I always love Zizek. Some of that stuff was familiar to me. I think I've heard him talk about some of that stuff in interviews and such. But it's a good one. Liberal communist. I like that term.
Liberal communist, yes, he brings that up a lot. So you and I are the problem, and probably any of our listeners here, and we should all be taken out and shot.
Yes, can't wait. All right, well,
yes, or have violence redirected towards us until we change.
Yes, right. All right, well, thanks, Jeff. We will reconvene in 2 weeks for part 2, but next week, we have a special treat for viewers. Jeff is going to be debating postmodernism with a Marxist. So Jeff will be the right-winger in this debate.
The right-winger, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or at least he'll be accused of defending an ideology that, maybe not an ideology, a motive analysis that helps the right.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
All right.
All right.
Well, thanks, Jeff. See you.
See you next time.